Hi, everyone. Coming to you from home today because a story we recorded yesterday in studio about Sweeney Gate, Sydney Sweeney Gate, that is, has already taken an interesting turn. And we wanted to make sure we had the most up to date information, of course, because now we're on day 5 of Sweeney Gate. But the reason everybody is so fixated on Sweeney Gate is, of course, because there's something serious at the heart of it. For the left, that's a question as to whether fascism and white supremacy are on the rise and if corporate America is fueling it. On the right, it's become a question of whether there's a vibe shift, whether corporations have backed off the sort of Mulvaney era peak woke, capital P, capital W approach to advertising, marketing, politics, and all of that. So first, remember, you can subscribe to the premium edition of the show over at undercurrents.tv. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And now let's dive into day 5 of Sweeney Gate. I know you all know this because we talk about it all the time here on Undercurrents. Sometimes two people read the same news story and then walk away with completely different opinions. Well, have you ever wondered why? That's why I've started using ground news. It just cuts through the noise, the algorithmic traps, and the clickbait. If you care about facts over spin, and I know everyone here does, it's honestly a game changer. And that's because, let's just take a look at this example. I'm putting Hunter Biden, Andrew Callahan here into the ground news search function. You can see it was covered by 34 news outlets at the time that I recorded this. And as I scroll down, the coverage is wildly different from outlet to outlet, and you can instantly compare how left, center, and right-leaning sources are framing the same event. If you notice there's a difference in the coverage, you then also, because of ground news, have the reference point as to why the coverage might be different in headline A versus headline B. And maybe it's not even the ideological bias that explains it. Maybe it's also the independence of the news outlet. Maybe it's also the owner of the news outlet, which you can actually see in the ground news feature, which is really amazing. It's a one-stop shop for assessing news framing, for assessing bias. It's all right there. So if you are serious about staying informed, get 40% off Ground News's Vantage Plan by clicking the link in my description or scanning this QR code. Don't just consume the news. Understand the news. That is one of the hardest things to do right now, and ground news helps you see what you're missing. What we originally covered just yesterday was the statement that American Eagle put out that seemed to be pushing back and said, quote, "The absurd response from some corners of the internet is absolutely not reflective of how American Eagle's customers feel." They said, quote, "This is yet another example of how social media is not just reflective of real life." So that was given from an American Eagle rep to TMZ. This is actually sort of amusing. TMZ then not retracted the statement, but they took it and attributed it, said it was not meant to, basically what TMZ has since said is this was not meant to be attributed to a spokesperson from American Eagle, but then they backtracked and said it was actually just, TMZ said, from a source who was plugged into American Eagle. From a journalistic perspective, here's a quick theory on what happened. Someone from American Eagle was authorized, given the green light, to talk to TMZ about Sweeney Gate. It was always an unnamed representative, so that part doesn't change at all. But because it was attributed to an American Eagle rep in the TMZ story, corporate American Eagle, probably what happened to someone even higher up the chain, said, this is not an official statement from an American Eagle representative. We have no reason to be wading into this. So TMZ then said, actually, this is just being attributed to a source within American Eagle world. That was likely due to some negotiating. TMZ was probably like, hey, you told us this on background. We're using it. It's accurate. It's what you told us. You work at American Eagle. But this distinction is meaningful because what we covered yesterday, we can look at this tweet from Daily Wire journalist and former guest on the show, Megan Basham, who said the statement itself from American Eagle was an even bigger vibe shift than the ad itself. And we recorded a video basically agreeing with that. Now, this is splitting hairs on day 5 of Sweeney Gate, but it's still, I think, an interesting story about the corporate positioning in this case. So TMZ taking their official representative off of it it is kind of interesting. I don't know why they did that, but I think Megan was correct at the time that American Eagle talking to TMZ saying we're authorizing a rep to go out there and put this statement in the press that the social media backlash is ridiculous, which my perspective is that the social media backlash is ridiculous. Walked through this a bit yesterday and I'll do it again here since we're updating the video, which is the notion that American Eagle and Sydney Sweeney's team, any given celebrity at the level, the high echelon that Sydney Sweeney occupies, is a business in and of themselves, and a major business in and of themselves. They have lots and lots of people working on their team, just like American Eagle as a major corporation has many, many layers of bureaucracy. So if you're putting out a big ad like this one, that means there are dozens of meetings. There is a long email trail. There's so many resources that go into doing something like this, so many meetings that go into doing something like this. The idea that this was intentionally dog whistling at white supremacy, as opposed to the Occam's razor explanation that it was about Sydney Sweeney being mid or not being mid, which is probably the viral discourse about Sydney Sweeney. I mean, if you just Google Sydney Sweeney mid, explosion of different discourses on different websites about whether or not Sydney Sweeney is mid. And so Sydney Sweeney then winking, nodding at the camera, and doing what is it? It's a homophone with jeans and jeans, Genes and Jeans. By far, the likeliest explanation here is that Sydney Sweeney and her team thought it would be funny to do a wink and a nod. She's got good genes. She actually is hot. She's not mid. To me, that just seems very likely. I will say that Sydney Sweeney being white, blonde, and blue-eyed and talking about genetics in a jeans ad, you can obviously read between the lines and see why people are making the leap to what the hell is this? It's strange. I don't actually deny that, but I think it's unusual that was intentional, and I think assuming it's intentional gives way more ascribes way more competence to people who work in marketing and advertising at corporate America than is due to them. They probably thought they had a really clever little pun on whether Sydney Sweeney was mid to break the internet and sell more American Eagle denim. So that's my take. People disagree with me, but fascinating that American Eagle took off the sort of air of sanctioning the statement to the press. And I think it does slightly change Megan's point about whether this is representative of some broader vibe shift. And the point that I was making as well is like, if you have American Eagle putting out an official statement saying this is silly social media backlash, you have a sign that a major corporation, particularly one that is its target audience is younger people, saying social media mobs are not reflective of broader customer sentiments, and we will not be responding to them. And we won't be responding to them in the way that they want us to, right? We won't be giving in to their demands for an apology or retraction or anything like that. And if you weren't in the fever swamps of the online discourse during kind of peak cancel culture, that seems quaint to you. It seems obvious. Like, of course, people who are organizing mobs on Twitter, I think I crunched the numbers once back around like 2019. I think it came out to like maybe 14% of the adult population was a daily user of Twitter. Most of the country is not on Twitter, let alone every single day. And you're self-selecting, right, into a highly political platform, and to being the type of person that actually even likes to post your own thoughts about politics, about culture, and all of that. So it's not a perfect sample size of the broader American Eagle, the broader American Eagle, let's say, audience. And because of that, you could repeat this over and over again with brands. Bud Light would do a Dylan Mulvaney influencer collaboration because we know this from inside Bud Light at the time. They thought that this was how you would gain the loyalty or the respect of or admiration of a younger audience, which, again, a younger, hipper audience, that is completely insane because the cost-benefit analysis always would tell you that you are going to, the small benefit of making Bud Light look hip to whatever small group of people were following Dylan Mulvaney, narrow slice of the public that were following Dylan Mulvaney, popular influencer, but not a monoculture celebrity, is going to be outweighed by the costs of alienating so many of your customers who don't see any reason to be injecting this type of culture war politics into a beer influencer collaboration, and thought the whole thing was kind of a slap in the face to people who disagree with them on the types of things that Mulvaney was promoting. So that's obvious. But again, to Charles Murray writes about this in Coming Apart, which I maintain is the most important book about journalism that has nothing to do with journalism, but also maybe about American politics, period. We sort ourselves now in ways that didn't happen in the past by education and affluence into super zips. And also just in general, we are socioeconomically segregated in ways that weren't true in America's past. And what that means is that we're talking in our own bubbles, whether you're working class or highly affluent, and you have that college degree, you maybe have a master's or a PhD, you're less likely to socialize with people outside of your socioeconomic strata. And that has created these just very, very thick cultural bubbles. And so that's why brands like Bud Light, of all the brands in the world, you would just look around and say, how could this happen? But it's actually so simple how it happened. And it was because this is how ESG happened. It was because you had people who were a couple different paths here. They disagreed with the younger people who worked at their companies or the younger journalists that they talked to, but they were afraid to cross them because they operated on what I think is best described as a progressive or bigot binary. If you were not fully in line with what Dylan Mulvaney said, you were necessarily a bigot. You weren't just a good faith person in disagreement, you were bigoted. So their cost benefit analysis on that question was always, hey, the benefit of just going along with this is outweighed by the costs of maybe getting blown up, losing my job, having to answer to the board, becoming a media story, all of that. So some of it was path of least resistance, fear of crossing such or transgressing such a binary. Some of it was actually that you started to see millennials in positions of leadership who had been filtered through higher education, lived in cities, earned a certain amount of money, and became totally alienated from people outside of their cities. And so this built up to the point where they were no longer able to see truly where the country was. I mean, this is how you have everybody assuming Donald Trump could never win in 2016. It's because you weren't spending time with people. If you were a journalist in Washington, D.C. or New York in 2016, you weren't spending time with people who loved Donald Trump and understood, or just really didn't like Hillary Clinton and understood what was going to happen. So that's an important element of this too. And also then, journalists are disproportionately on Twitter. It basically functions as an assignment editor for a lot of media outlets. And so when you start to see those mobs of people, they are in your socioeconomic sort of sorted groups, and you probably agree with them on trans issues, for example. So you then see this mob coming for Bud Light. You realize that you can mine it for headline clickbaits and amplify it into this big national story, when in reality, nobody cares about this particular transgression or this particular dust up. And so this was like a perfect storm for changing culture and shoving these new things down the throats of people who weren't on that same page, alienating customers. That obviously happened with Bud Light. Like, their bottom line actually did suffer from what happened with Dylan Mulvaney. But those sort of big brands, they like American Eagle, by the way, had to think about those things. And so American Eagle coming out and having an official representative, even though they were unnamed, telling TMZ, this is just social media craziness. I think it did really reflect something interesting. And the Sweeney ad reflects something interesting in and of itself, of course, because there were a lot of these brands who actively were trying to avoid casting like white, blonde hair, blue-eyed people as the representatives of true beauty. And the idea was that you would just you could sort of score points by putting someone who's non-white in ads like this, and you can take a sort of PR victory lap, and also you don't want to step on any minds by getting accused of only promoting whiteness as the form of beauty. And some of that, by the way, is a course correction, right, from very real racism in America's past that, of course, culturally seeped into advertising and all of that. It's not that the critics of the problem are entirely wrong. It's just that it became such a minefield, such a cultural minefield, that brands were actually hurting themselves, overthinking, hurting themselves, responsive to such a narrow slice of the public that actually deeply cared in ways that ultimately became alienating, not to people that are racist, but to people who just don't want to have to think about this when they're watching jean advertisements, and for perfectly valuable reasons. So I do think it's a slight shift that TMZ took that attribution down to just an unnamed source with an American Eagle, but it seems very likely what happened here is that American Eagle did initially authorize this, backed off of it, and probably because they didn't want to be seen like they were doubling down, or maybe the TMZ journalist made a legitimate mistake and was only supposed to attribute this to somebody on background, as it's called in journalism circles, as opposed to a representative from American Eagle. I kind of doubt that's the case, but we're really, once again, splitting hairs on this. I think the bottom line is that someone at American Eagle is with the rest of the country and saying the social media backlash is just not representative of where most people are. They were sharing this number, if I go back here, about how independent polling found 71% of respondents thought the commercial was appealing. You don't usually share information like that with TMZ unless it's authorized, with the press unless it's authorized. So I think that's more evidence that American Eagle had their wires crossed, something to that degree. But either way, American Eagle is standing by the ad. They're not apologizing, taking down the ad, and even went so far as to have someone talk to TMZ and share the information with TMZ, even if they later wanted that not to be attributed to an official representative, but merely a source. If this were 2020, I think American Eagle would have issued an apology. I think we all realize American Eagle probably would have issued an apology. And maybe even Sydney Sweeney would have issued an apology, made some little video, put out a Notes app statement, very hip, very in vogue at the time. I think we kind of all understand that's what happened. I think we kind of all understand that we are not living in 2020 anymore, very clearly. But this is another sign that corporate America, and that's the value in the statement, whether it's attributed to American Eagle officially or just a source inside of the company, you can hear them sort of repeating the argument that conservatives were making 5 years ago. This is like, it could have been ripped from the pages of conservative media 5 years ago. And not just conservatives, by the way, like sort of heterodox centrists, people on the center left, were saying this at the time. And to see that in the flesh, in the statement, again, whether it's official or just a source talking to TMZ from inside of the company, it's really, really interesting. So that's our update here on Sweeney Gate. Make sure, again, to subscribe wherever you download your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. And at undercurrents.tv, you get the full premium experience of the show. We have an episode just for premium subs up there that continues our episode from yesterday and goes into even some more detail. So head on over, undercurrents.tv, and we'll see you back here with more soon.